When people discuss the world's most deadly mountain, K2 often comes to mind. And whilst it may have the hardest climbing difficulty, there is a mountain nestled in the heart of the Himalayas which has a much more unforgiving chance of survival. It's so dangerous that it has a death rate of 27%. For every 100 successful summits, there are also 27 deaths. This mountain hosts hurricane-level winds at its peak. Avalanches can cascade down its treacherous face at any moment. Its high altitude reduces available oxygen, making it hard to breathe. Combining this with its technical difficulty has meant less than 400 people in history have successfully reached its summit. All it takes is one wrong step or a sudden change in weather, and then the mountain claims its next casualty. Such a gamble with your one and only life is rewarded with breathtaking views that only a select few have experienced. To show just how lethal this mountain is, we need to discuss its location, the altitude, the unpredictable weather, the technical difficulty of the climb, and most threatening of them all, the avalanche risk. This is Annapurna, the silent killer. As I mentioned earlier, Annapurna has a 27% fatality rate, which is a lot higher than Mount Everest's at 3.2%. The location is one of the reasons for that. Annapurna is situated in the Himalayan range, spanning across Nepal and Tibet. Its remote location means reaching base camp takes about 6 days of trekking. Most begin at Kathmandu, then travel to Pokhara, passing through Poon Hill and other locations before reaching base camp. The journey is demanding as you navigate through dense forests, you cross rivers, and you traverse many high-altitude plateaus. However, you are treated with breathtaking views. The lower elevations are brimming with over 6,000 types of flora and hundreds of birds, but obviously the higher you go, the more barren Annapurna becomes. Along the way, there are also tea houses, which provide a place to stay, warm food, and a hot shower. But that doesn't sound very dangerous, right? Well, the reason Annapurna's location makes it such a deadly climb is because of its remoteness and difficult terrain. It makes helicopter rescues both rare and hard to execute. This means any climber facing a medical emergency has a greater chance of it turning fatal due to a prolonged wait for assistance. Also, unlike other regions such as Everest, where the locals are widely active and always available for support, when it comes to Annapurna, the locals are not as heavily invested into climbing and mountaineering, nor are they as willing to risk their life, which makes it much harder to get human support in case of a medical emergency. Annapurna is the tallest member of a compact portion of a mountain range known as the Annapurna Massif. Nobody had ever attempted to summit one of these mountains until 1950, and the altitude is a contributing factor to that. Annapurna reaches a height of 26,545 feet, or 8,091 meters, making it the 10th highest peak in the world. For reference, the tallest man-made structure in the world is the Burj Khalifa, which stands at 2,716 foot tall, nearly 10 times less than Annapurna. Being above 8,000 meters puts Annapurna in an exclusive club with just 13 other members, aptly named the 8,000ers. Surprisingly, Annapurna was the first of these mountains to be successfully summited. The higher you climb, atmospheric pressure falls, meaning oxygen molecules are further apart. You begin to breathe heavier, but there is less oxygen circulating your body and reaching your muscles. This leads to fatigue, nausea, and disorientation. When you cross the 8,000 meter barrier, this lack of oxygen is called the death zone. It's essential to acclimatise, otherwise Annapurna is highly likely to claim its next victim. The issue is, Annapurna has many unsafe camps due to the avalanche risk, giving you less time to acclimatise, but we'll come back to that later. Annapurna is notorious for its unpredictable weather that can turn deadly in an instant, and reaches temperatures as low as -15 degrees. Most people watching this video at some point have experienced having cold, numb hands before. But imagine that whilst traversing a sharp rock face 8,000 meters high, whilst high velocity winds are battering you from the side. Not my idea of fun. Remember when I said Annapurna was the first of the 8,000ers to be summited? Well, those two people who made it to the peak and back lost all their toes and most of their fingers from frostbite. So yeah, the weather on Annapurna is deadly and a good forecast cannot be trusted. The 2014 Nepal snowstorm disaster showcased the devastating effect the weather surrounding Annapurna can have. Unusually severe snowstorms on and around Annapurna resulted in the deaths of at least 43 people. There's a popular trekking route around the mountain called the Annapurna Circuit. It's popular due to its ease of access, not needing a tent, and spectacular views. You don't have to pack too heavily, but in 2014 it meant trekkers were underprepared. Temperatures rapidly plunged and lightly equipped walkers found themselves trapped at more than 5,000 meters. Search and rescue efforts saved up to 400 people, but still at least 43 were not so lucky. The incident is said to be Nepal's worst trekking disaster ever. Annapurna is much less travelled than mountains such as Everest, meaning you don't have the luxury of as many fixed ropes, well-travelled routes, resources, and Sherpas. But for the sake of this video, let's assume you have perfect conditions for your climb. This route is called the Dutch Rib. It has its dangers, but it also slightly reduces the avalanche risk. Base camp is truly the eye of the storm. The ground is described as beach-like and can be relatively warm, allowing you to settle quickly. It also sits lower than other 8,000ers at 4,200 meters. For example, K2's base camp is nearly 1,000 meters higher. The community at base camp is strong. You are surrounded by like-minded people, all experiencing the same excitement and trepidation for the challenge ahead. Many of the Sherpas that operate on Annapurna won't do the climb without completing the puja ceremony first. This is a worship to the mountain gods, asking for a safe passage. The first section is relatively manageable, and in really dry conditions you can go from base camp to Camp 1 in trainers, but most of the time you'll reach what's called the crampon point before you gain altitude and experience some thick snow. Camp 1 is typically used as a first rotation and to carry loads. Most experienced climbers skip Camp 1 on their summit push. The trek from Camp 1 to Camp 2 is daunting. You have to cross over a huge glacier with hundreds of tiny ice cracks and gaps, so you have to be extremely wary of your footing. There are multiple sharp incline walks in deep snow, and just imagine how demanding on the body each step is, all whilst receiving less oxygen. There are also small ice walls which you have to climb. Camp 2 is a wide open area on snow, but the risk of an avalanche is high, so it's not somewhere you want to stay for a long time. The climb to Camp 3 is once again steep and covered in thick snow. You have to make your way up a sharp, elevated piece of land known as the Dutch Rib. Parts of it are hollow, so it can be hard to find proper grip with your feet. The final section is a serac, or block of glacial ice, which requires all your stamina to overcome to reach Camp 3. At no point are you safe on the ascent of Annapurna. Camp 3 is on top of a hanging glacier, and there are crevasses everywhere. But the rest and recovery is essential to complete the rest of the climb. But I can't imagine it's easy to sleep well, 7,000 meters high. It can be so cold overnight when you're ready to leave camp that some of your equipment is frozen and almost impossible to get back on. The route from Camp 3 to 4 is short, but it's mostly a huge vertical wall which is extremely demanding on the body. The final route to the summit follows simple but tiring ramps. Describing it like this sounds like I'm downplaying it, but you have to remember, every step higher, your body is receiving less oxygen. You've already climbed over 3,000 meters from base camp, so your body is tired. You likely haven't slept well due to the altitude of the camps. You're simultaneously freezing but warm. You are constantly aware that an avalanche can take your life in an instant, and you know that you have a limited supply of supplementary oxygen. Yet still, you have the will inside to make the final push to the peak, and it provides you with a reward that most humans will never receive. But as I mentioned in my K2 video, it's not over when you reach the peak of Annapurna, because the real danger starts now. You have to descend. 80% of mountaineering accidents happen on the way down. That journey assumed that you had good weather. Any sudden change in climate could mean you have to change your route or completely abort the mission. It also assumes you avoided Annapurna's biggest threat, its avalanches. All of the 8,000 meter mountains have a high avalanche risk. The bigger the mountain, the more snow, the more chance of one happening. But what makes Annapurna so dangerous is that most routes mean you have to spend a lot of time in avalanche zones. Annapurna is comprised of very steep slopes which encourage the build-up and then release of snow. Combine this with rapid changes in temperature and wind, and you have a perfect storm to cause an avalanche. Whilst climbing from base camp to Camp 1, you can sometimes witness avalanches happening on Annapurna's face. This documentary, which I've linked in the description below, shows exactly how dangerous it is. A group of 31 climbers opted to take the Dutch Rib route instead of the standard one. This avalanche that they are witnessing from Camp 2 is happening on the standard route. If they would have taken that, they would all be dead. If an avalanche were to hit you whilst you were 7,000 meters high, holding on to a thin rope, you would be swept away like a feather in the wind. With its towering peaks, treacherous terrain and devastating avalanches, Annapurna is a formidable challenge for anyone who is willing to gamble their life to reach its peak. But beyond the danger lies unparalleled beauty, majestic snow-covered peaks, the golden glow of sunrise, and a view reserved for the few. This is Annapurna, the silent killer.